Okay, let me say a couple things right off the top. First of all, thank you for joining me. I greatly appreciate it. Let me make sure something sounds right. Yeah, it does. Okay. How are you doing, everyone? My name is Luke Thomas. It is 6:04 p.m. East Coast time here on the 3rd of November, 2025. I was just in New York City. Can you tell I was in New York City today? Because I had to get water at the freaking Dwayne Reed. That's all they had. But I wanted to come live here and have this broadcast now because Ariel Helwani did his show today. And I thought he dropped what I would consider to be some of the most insane news I've heard in the sport in years. Honestly, up there maybe ever. I don't maybe I am dramatizing it. You can be the judge. Ultimately, it's up to you. But I don't seem to detect that other folks have the same level of alarm or maybe have like noodled through what the implication is of what he has said. So the purpose of this broadcast today is let's recap how we got here very, very quickly. And then I want to play you a couple of clips from Ariel's show that I retweeted because this seems like enormous news to me. Like truly like earth, like existentially relevant news. Okay. Let's do this. Thumbs up if you're watching. Thank you for joining me. I greatly appreciate it. Hit subscribe if you haven't. Send this out to somebody else who you might know. Certainly, no obligation today. It's always appreciated, but don't feel compelled. If you want to put something into the super chat, we can do a short Q&A period at the end. But really, I'm just glad you're here. And more importantly, I really want this to be an exercise in thinking through exactly what we understand and the heaviness of what this means. Okay. All right. With that out of the way, you know what we always say here. Let's get this party started. Okay. Let's quickly recap how we got here. On Saturday, November 1st, there was the UFC Fight Night Garcia versus Onama card. It was headlined by Steve Garcia versus David Onama, which, by the way, okay, we'll get to that. Not in the main event. That's not what we're talking about today. But in one of the main card bouts, a featherweight contest between two fighters, Isaac Dulgarian and Yadier del Valle. Right, the two of them had a featherweight contest, and early in the week, Dulgarian was a minus 250 or more favorite, give or take. And about an hour before fight time, there was massive movement on the line, the money line, where he dropped a full dollar amount. And obviously, Del Valle's price went up, and all the money came in on him. Right. So that's how the line moved. All the money comes in on him. And this was very, very suspicious. Now, in real time, people didn't know what it meant. The fight goes on. Just didn't put up a very tough effort. Gets lambasted by Daniel Cormier and Michael Chiesa. And then in the end, he loses via submission. He never lost by stoppage. And of course, all the money had come in, not just on his opponent, but his opponent to win via stoppage. And he loses inside the first round after a very half-hearted effort, at least what appeared to be a very half-hearted effort. Then I get up this morning, and he is cut from the organization. Okay. That's what we basically reacted to on MK today. That's why I made a video about it just a few hours ago. And there's some more details where obviously some sports books were alerted that the betting was flagged. Some sports books refunded, not all of them. I think just a couple did. But there was certainly the sports books more broadly. They pulled prop bets. They kind of indicated after the fact that they knew something was up. What ultimately happens with that in the end, I guess we'll have to see. But this is just sort of adding to the story. And this is what we largely reacted to. But then Ariel said something today, which I feel like is monumental, massive, like almost massive beyond words. Now, I don't know that. I don't know enough to really say. Additionally, this is not me corroborating Ariel's reporting. I don't have information to either deny or reaffirm it. I'm merely reacting to what he said. And I've said this many times. If Ariel is reporting something, I know some people like him, some people don't, some people, whatever. But in terms of, do you trust his reporting? Do I trust his reporting? Without a question. If he is reporting it in public, it is true. I'm telling you. The guy has been in the business a very long time. I don't know if I've ever seen him have to, based on the facts on the ground, retract stories. I've seen Mike Coppinger have to do that, or change him up or whatever. I've never seen Ariel have to do that. Not once. I worked with him. If he's reporting it, it is as good as you can get in terms of corroboration. Well, let's play what he said. I want to play what he said, and then I want to react to it because there's other components here, including a figure in the sport who I was unaware of, who was tweeting some of this stuff over the weekend, and it was big time. He was insinuating that the FBI was looking into it, that there have been hundreds of UFC fights that had been flagged, that they were looking and auditing individual referee performances. I mean, he was making out to be apocalyptic. We'll go back to those tweets. Let's look at what Ariel said, and then we'll just start this process, right? Okay. Let's do this, and then we'll fix the back. There we are. Okay. Let's pull this up so you guys can see it right there. Hang on. I'm going to make sure you can hear. Don't worry.
My understanding is this is on the FBI's radar. How deep of an investigation is unclear at this time. This is all very new. But yes, it is accurate. I believe there's a gentleman named Harry Mack on social media who is
the guy
having a nice little victory tour after all of this, and I'm sure he's going to have another one. I'm not familiar with his work, but he did write that yesterday. And so that is my understanding. And my understanding is that this is not an isolated incident. And what I mean by that is I have talked to multiple people who have either experienced or know of others who experienced situations where they have been approached about their willingness to do something like this. So I have been told by multiple people that they have been approached, they have been talked to and said, are you interested in this? Are you interested in throwing a fight for X amount of dollars? Believe that's what happened with Derek Minner. And all signs right now are pointing to something of that sort happening here. This is a massive issue for the UFC. And when you consider, now I haven't been told this part that I'm about to say, but when you consider the questionable refereeing as of late, you can't help, I said this last week, you can't help but let your mind go there as well, because there's no other possible explanation for some of the wacky stuff that we have seen as of late. And it's very easy to do. It's extremely easy to do. We've seen it. We've now seen it in broad daylight multiple times. And I think what is happening here, adding 1 + 1 + 1, I believe what is happening here is people are preying on lower level fighters who don't make a lot of money, who are in tough spots, who are fighting in the major leagues, and they're offering them a quick fix. They're not going to like the top dogs, but they're offering a quick fix to the lower level fighters. How prevalent is this? I can't tell you, but I've now heard it multiple occasions in my conversations over the past 24 plus hours saying, are you interested? And that's a huge problem. And so how big of a story this becomes remains to be seen. But this is happening in gyms, in private. This is a big story.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, that seems to me like enormous news. Enormous news. It corroborates something else that this gentleman had been saying. Let me pull up this guy, Harry Mack. Forgive me, I did not know who he was, Let me show you this part too, so you can just get a clear sense of it right here. Let's see. Excuse me. Update. Federal regulators have flagged over 100 UFC fights this year for abnormal betting patterns, including 2 additional fighters on the last night's card. So that's the same one from Garcia versus Onama. Shit is about to get very ugly. Still working to confirm it, but it sounds like the feds are moving to audit Herzog's fights. Excuse me. Okay. Wrap your head around exactly what he is saying here. Noodle through what this is. He doesn't mention, maybe he doesn't know, I certainly don't. He mentions that people are preying on low-level fighters. Okay, first of all, what people? Again, I believe him. This is not me asking Ariel to like defend the story. I believe it. I'm now going to the next stage and I'm asking myself, who would do such a thing? Who would go to a fighter, unscrupulous person? Yes, but there can be many different kinds of unscrupulous people. Who would go to somebody like that and then offer to cut them in on a deal of illegal gambling proceeds that risk federal prison time to do? Ask yourself what kind of person and what kind of occupation a person like that might be in. Is this somebody who is, quite literally, if they're doing this, they're at least engaged in some level of, it's covert to the world, but to these individual networks, overt law breaking. What kind of person does that? And what kind of job do they have? It's not somebody, it could be, but it's unlikely to be somebody with a desk job. It is unlikely to be somebody who lives the broad strokes of their life totally above board. And then this is the one area of rule breaking that they engage in. Again, that is possible, and I do not know. I want to be as clear as I possibly can. I am speculating. But these are, and I'm going to be as euphemistic as I can here, malevolent forces. Is it and I'm asking, I do not know, is it a criminal enterprise that is involved in doing this? Or are these individual rich bettors trying to game the system in some kind of way? I don't know the answer to that. There's not a good answer either way, but at least one of those versions is a deeply distressing answer about who that could be. Because he's not, again, because potentially he doesn't know, but you'll notice that Ariel never mentions who is doing that. And it seems to me we need to respect that we also don't know. But when we begin to ask ourselves who fits the makeup of the kind of person that would engage in this, you're not going to get back CEOs of companies. You're not going to get back, for the most part, people who are living otherwise normal lives. This is extremely risky and deeply illegal behavior. It's taking place in Las Vegas, Nevada. Are you picking up like what I'm putting down, like what a couple of the ways that this could go about who is actually doing it? You'll recall, and I'm not suggesting that this is the case, but you'll recall at least what we know in terms of what the government has alleged in the NBA scandal. People were making a big joke about the fact that the Italian mafia was a part of that. Although, again, the government has alleged it. To what extent they can, prove these facts or these allegations, I should say, I don't know. Is there any kind of relationship to the situation here? I have no idea, nor am I suggesting as much. But I'm just saying, if what Ariel is saying is true, we have to ask ourselves, who would do something like that? More to the point, that's one sort of important component of the story. But more to the point, like, think about what they're doing, whoever these people are. Maybe they're just, super overzealous bettors who just want to, feed their gambling addiction. That could be a plausible explanation as well. Whoever it is, they're not going, as he indicates, to the big dogs wouldn't take the risk. There'd be no need. But if you don't necessarily make a lot, you don't necessarily compete a lot, and you're of a certain level, it's really hard to kind of make financial headway. Folks have asked, what is the relationship to fighter pay? Well, let me put it to you this way. I don't know if any of this rises to the level of, more serious. Could you call something like this extortion? I don't know. What's the other part too? Like, again, without knowing who these people are, be saying yes or no to them, I don't know what that means, right? But assuming that you have total choice here, nevertheless, focus on the makeup of who the person is that we're talking about here. Consider something. And I was having a discussion with a friend, and they were making this point to me. This is not blackmail. I'm not saying that it's blackmail, but just think about something. If you were trying to get a security clearance and they were trying to assess, because if you want a major security clearance, they look at things like this. They look at your, like, to what extent can you be blackmailed for things? To what extent have you engaged in infidelity? To what extent do you have poor financial health and or debts? Anything that can be leveraged, and financial distress is one of the things that can be leveraged in the event for something like getting a security clearance. And that's not what's happening here, obviously. It's completely different. But I'm just asking, does it not make sense that the kind of person you would leverage would be somebody who's good enough to make it to the big show, but might compete more regularly in the apex? There's not necessarily a ton of scrutiny. But the point I'm trying to talk about is, like, look at the segment of the fighter population that these people, whoever they are allegedly focused in on. I can't think of anything that would be like a greater indictment of fighter pay than the idea that like it's concrete evidence that the level of pay here, assuming what we're hearing is true, is part of an incentive structure to then engage in this kind of risky and otherwise illegal behavior. Right? I mean, because they can't target the people who make a sufficient amount. It just doesn't make any sense. But for people at this level where, UFC Apex or whatever level, well, then you have a kind of a different question. They're much more able to be, potentially leveraged for something like this based on various points of financial distress. Also, like, understand you had this guy tweeting this. Federal regulators have flagged over 100 UFC fights this year for abnormal betting patterns, including 2 additional fighters on the last UFC card, whoever that actually ends up being. And then Ariel says he's talked to multiple people. Consider something else. How many people did Ariel not talk to? Not that I'm saying he didn't do his job. I'm saying he's obviously as well connected as it gets, but he's only going to be able to talk, even in a 24-hour period, to a modest fractional amount of people to gather information. And as a consequence, in so doing, he's only getting a small read. And even then, he had, in his own estimation, multiple people reach out to him and say, hey, these people are either he talked to people who had been approached or people who he knew had been approached by whoever the hell these people are, to suggest that this was like, not ubiquitous, but not necessarily uncommon. And again, he doesn't know how much it is, nor do I know how much it is. But if you've got this kind of report here from this guy, which kind of matches pretty closely, again, they're not identical reports. I'm not suggesting one is a direct corroboration of the other, but they kind of rhyme. Again, there's a lot we don't know. I want to be as clear. I keep saying it over and over again because I really want to drive that home. We just don't know answers to some pretty big questions. But if you've got over 100 UFC fights potentially flagged, if individual referee performances are being audited, if you've got, according to Ariel, he's spoken to multiple people who either had been approached or knew had other people who had been approached, this does not appear to me to be, again, we don't know what the numbers are, but this does not appear to be a one-off incident or, a thing that only happens now and again. Seems like there is at least some reason to believe that this might be, I don't know if the word is systemic, I have no idea, but let's say this, worthy of inquiry, right? Worthy of investigation, worthy of actually finding out what the answer is to that question. Just how ubiquitous is this? Just how common is this? To what extent is this, a thing you can measure? How often does this happen? Now, we should note that the UFC put out a statement. Let me read it to you. This came today, as a matter of fact. And I did retweet this as well. Let me show it to you so you guys can see it for yourselves. Here it is. Let me put it here. This is from the UFC Today via Aaron Bronstetter. Quote, like many professional sports organizations, UFC works with an independent betting integrity service, that is true, to monitor wagering activity on our events. Our betting integrity partner, IC360, and they used to be called US Integrity, monitors wagering on every UFC event and is conducting a thorough review of the facts surrounding the Dulgarian versus Del Valle bout on Saturday, November 1st. We take these allegations very seriously, and along with the health and safety of our fighters, don't think is more important than the integrity of our sport. I want to be clear here. I don't think the UFC is, as it pertains to what could be again, I don't know if it's pervasive, but let's say non-singular problem, right? I don't think it's one thing that has happened. That seems to be a fair read. I don't think the UFC is obviously, I'm not in any way suggesting that they're in on it, and far from it. I would say that they would be a victim in this particular case, right? And certainly by the legal definition, they would be the victims of, if people are trying to approach their fighters and entice them to engage in criminality. That's obviously nothing that they're involved with, nor would I ever even suggest as much. The point is that I'm not saying that they're in any way involved, but the question is, of course not. They're not. They're looking into it. They have their betting partner looking into it. I reached out to IC360. They're all looking into it. They don't want this. This is existential for them. Right? If there's any question about whether the product is above board, if there are questions about to what extent what you're watching is real, and these are pervasive questions that, if it's ultimately it's what people believe. Do people trust that what they're looking at is, obviously every 100% of the time it's not possible, but over the course of your life, an aberrant event should be very, very rare, once every, 3-4 times in your whole life, if that, once or twice in your whole life. And the question is, if it's happening much more than that, we need to know exactly what that number is. And I'm sure they're looking into it. The only part I have a question about is when we mentioned this on Monday's MK, which is Kash Patel, and the FBI apparently is looking into this, is a UFC fan. He wanted to do business with the UFC. He's obviously appointed by Donald Trump to be FBI director. He was approved. He's, Donald Trump is obviously best friends with Dana White. Like, to what extent is the FBI even in a position to really seek this through to the place that it needs to go? I have no idea. But again, these are questions that I have raised that I don't know the answer to, that I feel like we need one. There has to be some kind of answer to this. But, just think about what it means if the level of ubiquity around what is folks have concerns about is as much as what's been suggested on this particular case, upwards of 100 or more. That seems like a lot to me. Again, I'm not sure what a low number would be, but that seems like a lot. Now, one of the other interesting details that we also found out, and this came from Harry, was that the FBI and I guess the betting partner, maybe one or both, had alerted the UFC that there was suspicious betting, and the UFC did something of their due diligence to go and ask Dulgarian, "Hey, is there something fishy going on?" To which he apparently has denied. He maintains and denies everything up to this day, as far as I know. They went and asked him that. They got denials, but they then let the fight go through, and you got the result you got. You're going to get opinions that vary here, and I don't know what the right answer is. Ultimately, again, you can decide, but I think some people are going to decide that the UFC bears a level of complicity, not in, of course, arranging anything, but like if you got these kinds of aberrant betting and you were alerted to it and you ultimately let the bout go through, and then now it's kind of raised all these further suspicions and red flags, and again, let's assume for the sake of argument, I don't know that it was. None of us really know. But for the sake of argument, if it is a fixed fight, then they bear some complicity in bringing that to bear. And potentially, again, I don't know what level of due diligence they're using to counteract other efforts in other bouts in other places. This is also somewhat unknown, but again, raises yet another question: to what extent is the UFC engaging in efforts to minimize or pull bouts that have, concerns that have been raised to them by authorities about what they've seen or what they've monitored or what they might know otherwise. This seems to me like a pretty big issue. Am I out of my mind on this or something? Again, it's extremely important that we say as much. none of us know a lot. There's a difference between what you can believe and what you know. What you know is what you can prove, and what you can prove is what you can compile evidence for. And evidence is not just circumstantial stuff like paper trails and, testimonials, things that we simply could not have access to. We don't know a lot, but we have some information, and none of that information is particularly great. None of that information is particularly exonerating. And it just raises a series of infinitely more questions after the fact. We don't know. Who are these people that are offering, apparently in non-singular ways, money to low-level fighters to engage in stuff like this? What does it say about fighter pay? I know, again, I made this point in my other video. Yes, if you have people who are gambling addicts in the NBA, they can make $20 million a year and they're still going to gamble. Of course, that's the case. But as I mentioned before, if you're trying, to me, it's not a coincidence that they're trying to leverage the people who make on the UFC roster who make the least, whoever these people are, and however ubiquitous this may end up being. I should have put it on the screen and I didn't have it ready. I'm going to say this out loud, and I'll put this in the description box below. My email is lukethomasnews@gmail.com. If you know of anybody who has any information about this situation and they want to share it, please send this clip to them. lukethomasnews@gmail.com. All one word, Luke Thomas News, LUKETHOMASNEWS @gmail.com. Luke Thomas News. Send them that address, send them this clip, and if they want to reach out to me, I would love to hear more. As I mentioned before, I've reached out to IC360. I have not heard back from them. If I do, I will share with you what they said. Do y'all not feel a little bit weird about the kind of information that we have? Who the fuck is trying to get fighters to do this? How often are they doing it? How often have they succeeded? How many times have they succeeded and we didn't even catch it? Yeah, this one was again, Dulgarian is not charged with anything, and to the extent that he ever becomes, is innocent until proven guilty. But this one had enough red flags raised that there was, an identification around some inconsistencies or some aberrant trends around it. How many times has this happened? Not so much the movement of the line, but other kinds of things that were actually, fixed, or whatever the terminology may be, that we just never picked up on. I don't know the answer to that, but we need one. See, it seems to me like you guys know how my expression, your mileage may vary. It seems to me getting answers to these questions are like non-negotiable, like critical. This is like no organization, and I'm sure that they're not trying to allow it. I'm sure that they're trying to do something about it, but like no organization can allow their athletes to be, again, how ubiquitous it is, I don't know, but even if it's one or two or three, how many should be allowed to be leveraged like this? Of course, the answer is zero. And so if it is more than one, and now it's happening in a kind of way that is, is frequent, the word, I don't know, is, relatively consistent, maybe something like that. All of that is like if you let that go unchecked, it just ends up rotting the system. Everything has to work in concert with each other above board at the highest standard in order for this all to work. You can do it in this way in concert with one another, provided everything is accounted for in an above board way. And again, UFC is going to need time to collect information about this one, potentially any other situation that may be involved. We have to give them the ample space and ability to determine, the best course of action in some of these places and in some of these situations. But in broad strokes, some unnamed people, potentially a group we don't know, but some unnamed people trying to leverage the people who make the least, essentially, or around that cohort in the UFC in apex bouts, largely apex bouts, although I suppose it could extend beyond that. I don't know. In order to get them to engage in illegal gambling or illegal fight fixing in order to get illegal gambling proceeds. And then Ariel makes a point. He says, now, no one told him this. I think he is extrapolating. At least that's what I read from him saying, that how do you look at some of the weirdness in the judging and the refereeing this year and not get similar vibes? Or at a bare minimum, just raise your hand and be like, well, if we're having these problems on the fight side, What's to say we're not having these problems on the officiating side, especially when, again, you're getting situations that appear to be hard to parse. Now, the one thing that the average MMA fan misses, and even people who are in the industry for a long time like me, which is sometimes you can be in the industry a while, and then the rules of each state are esoteric and hard to follow. And, it turns out that Mark Smith in the co-main event from the Garcia Onama card, which was Ante Delia and Waldo Cortez Acosta, it turns out that like Nevada rules supersede the unified rules. So you can actually, they didn't waive according to them, they didn't waive the fight. And anyway, it didn't matter. They wanted to stop it, take a look at it, and restart it. Under Nevada rules, apparently they're allowed to do that. Under unified rules, you're not. But under apparently Nevada's rules, you can't. Is that them making it up as they go? I really have no idea. Okay, so you see what I'm getting at. But like, do I think that Ariel saying that is an unfair question? Absolutely not. How can anyone say that that's an unfair question based on what he said today? Shadowy people are showing up to gyms, hitting up, fighters of lesser means and trying to cut them in on illegal gambling proceeds for them fight fixing or, fucking up bouts or whatever. That is a fucking huge story. That is a huge story. Please tell me if I'm crazy on this. Please tell me if I'm missing something. Am I out of my mind? Am I overselling this? Is this a small thing? What do y'all think? Let's see what kind of questions you got. Bjorn says, which fights do you suspect were rigged? I'm really not going to engage in that right now. I would need time to evaluate. But if anyone's got a list of requests that they want me to take a look at, I would email me, lukethomasnews@gmail.com. I want to be, at a moment like this, we have to be very careful not to declare it is one thing or the other, or that we can, certifiably conclude that one person or another is at guilt of, X or Y crime. People are going to want to do that. I don't want to do that. I think that is, aside from being legally perilous, just unethical. We don't know some of these bigger questions, but feels like we need an answer. Darkness Fall says, you're the best, nothing extra. Oh, well, it's very nice, I suppose. Thank you very much. Love says, Harry Mack on Twitter potentially dropping another bomb implicating a certain MMA manager. We're going to take a look at that in just a second. I'll show it to you. Insane news. Does this make certain obscure fights that went so weirdly in question? Again, I can't say that if it's a fight was weird that, automatically it was fixed. That's really not my point. But because there's now question, people are going to use that to survey the broader landscape. And now everything becomes question. This is why making sure what you turn into the public is above board is important. Dude, let me just say this. If anyone from the UFC is watching, if the FBI comes to you with a weird betting line, my guess is what they're choosing to do is not declare on TV, hey, we pulled a bout because of irregular betting lines. I suspect that they don't want to engage in that, so they just let it rock and hope for the best. You cannot do that. If there are suspicious betting lines, it does not mean that those people involved have anything to do with it. Of course, there's always a number of explanations possible, but you don't want to be party to something if you can at all avoid it. You've got 14 goddamn fights on a card. You don't need all of them, especially when it's an Apex card, no offense. Pull that shit. It doesn't need to be on. Where the F are the investigative journalists? Boys and girls, we have warned you for years. This is what happens when newsrooms are gutted. You know who would follow this story like a dog on a bone? Steven Morocco. He doesn't work in the industry anymore, at least as far as I can tell. Like a dog on a bone, he'd be on top of this. He didn't care about getting interviews with fighters or managers or trying to be anyone's friend. He wanted to get to the bottom of stories, and we have drummed people like him out of the industry, and all that's left are chuckle fucks like me who, I can signal boost stuff, I can raise awareness, but I don't have this investigative. I mean, anyone could be a investigative journalist, but to be skilled at it takes time, and I don't have those skills. I don't have the Rolodex. I don't know what that's like, but we've drummed fucking people like that out of the industry. Look at the consequences. I warned everyone. Everyone was like, "Oh, we hate the MMA media." Fine, dude. Like, I get it. Don't get me wrong. Dude, I talk about how shitty the MMA media is. So, like, he who's without sin cast the first stone. But what I said was explicit. You're not going to like what comes next better. Because if you're gutting journalism and you're making journalism expensive when you need it, who is there to do it? Now, I'll do what I can. Again, LukeThomasNews@gmail.com. LukeThomasNews@gmail.com. Please send this to anyone who's got a tip. Send it to me. And there's secure ways to communicate. You can use, Signal and other stuff. But hit me up. I want to hear from you. Are backroom bonuses now seriously contentious? What would be the issue with backroom bonuses other than what the issues have already been this whole time? I don't know what that would be. No, I don't detect that. No. Justin says Dana should have to answer a ton of questions about fighter pay this week. I have a feeling he won't, though, because of the UFC's North Korean media setup. Will he even be at the UFC's event this week? I don't know. I don't know how that's going to go. The Last Stand says all of this out of a nothing Apex card is wild. I mean, you can't say it wasn't eventful. You know what I'm saying? You can't say it wasn't eventful. That was crazy. Let's see here. Dave says, if this is as it appears, how in the hell do we move forward with a White House card in just 8 months? Brother, we are in the Wild West. And if you're Paramount, what are you thinking about all of this? You're about to pay these people $8 billion a year. And again, I'm not blaming UFC, although, again, there's a question about to what extent you can blame them if they go forward after being alerted by authorities about irregular betting. That's a separate conversation. But, people coming to their fighters, it's absolutely not their fault. Now, again, there might be a question about, to what extent did fighter pay contribute to some of the incentive structure. But in terms of legal liability, they're absolutely not at fault whatsoever. Nevertheless, what is the public fallout going to be if the story continues to escalate? Where's it going to go? If multimillionaire NBA players are willing to risk their careers for a parlay, then of course someone getting 10 and 10 working a full-time job with debt would do so as well. It's insane not to. Again, the incentive structure appears to be quite strong, right? To the point you raise. Okay, Zion says, let's say there is a significant swath of fights that have been tarnished by some semblance of fight fixing. What are the possible consequences? Well, this is a great question. I think the answer is all the way from nothing to absolute ruin of the sport, existential collapse. Now, I'm not saying they're equally probable. That's not the point. But I'm saying you couldn't rule out either. So, for example, on the one hand, maybe they contain this. Maybe it goes away. Maybe most people stop caring. The news cycle moves fast. Even bad news doesn't last. Things just keep on rolling. Maybe that's one. Or another one is it doesn't. It keeps escalating and ballooning. And, and again, I'm going to make up a theoretical scenario. In a theoretical scenario, maybe it's revealed that this is happening regularly on every card, in which case, like, how do you fix that other than to just shut everything down? I don't imagine that is the likeliest possibility, but again, we don't know how prevalent or controllable or addressable or fixable this is. They weren't exactly telling us about this to begin with. Now, maybe there's a strategic law enforcement reason for that. That could very well be too. But, where is law enforcement in this question? Who are they contacting? If fighters are getting hit up by whoever these shadowy figures are they then reporting it to the FBI like they should be? Is the FBI following up? These are all questions I have. Odds the injury was disclosed without knowledge of the fighter. Possible. Yes. Right. Or, there were people who knew about something and they bet on their own and Dulgarian has nothing to do with it. It is possible. Create says, how does Paramount look at this before the deal? That is the $1 million question, or should I say the $7.7 billion question. If you've got this kind of thing bubbling under the surface that is taking place to an unknown, but whatever the level of scale is, it's unacceptable, right? Obviously, one case of a fighter being approached to do this is a lot better than 1,000, but any level of scale is unacceptable. What is the scale? How often is it happening? Have guys been hit up multiple times? How many times has the UFC been alerted about irregular betting or been tipped off by law enforcement or some kind of betting authority that they hire? And these are typically pretty good services, IC360. And to what extent did they let a fight continue like what is reported to have happened for this one? How often has that happened? Once again, these are all questions we need answers to. Data is in bed with the current administration of this country. Consequences will fall solely on the fighters, teams, judges, and refs. That would be my best guess too. I suspect that, like all scandals, the people with the least amount of power take the most amount of consequences, but one never knows. B. Sandu says, LT, see the rumors of Herzog being investigated. I have seen them. I don't know what to say about them. They are, as far as I know, just rumors. But this other guy who was reporting this stuff about the FBI, he seems to indicate that, according to what he says, Herzog's performances are being audited. But I have a feeling, even if that's true, he's not the only one. And, I want to be clear, I've known Jason a little bit, and I have, up until this year, kind of enjoyed what the work he's done as a referee. I admit that this year has not been his best year. That is not me saying, oh, well, there you go. That means that there's, he's a ne'er-do-well. That's really not my point either. Again, you need to make strong claims. You need strong evidence. And suspicion of things can be rational, but that's not the same as having the proof to declare something. So let's be careful with that. But I've definitely seen it. Devil Doctum says, I doubt the dork in the White House who just pardoned George Santos gives two shits about something like this. Yeah, probably not. This won't impact the White House card, in my opinion. Thanks for everything you do. Yeah, in all likelihood, not. Ming Trong says, how do you think this will affect the Ali Act amendment? Oh, wow. You mean, could it get... Well, you have to ask yourself, to what extent will the resistance to the act in the committee or on the floor use this as an opportunity to dissuade voting in favor of it? That is really too hard to say. By the way, I'm waiting to go to some of these hearings. They're obviously scheduling a hearing on the House side. The Senate is holding committee meetings currently, even though the government is shut down. The House is not. And so this was only introduced in the House. So we're waiting on the House to resume activity before some of these hearings get going again. To what extent does that show up there? That is an important question. To what extent does this grow or get smaller by then? These are all things we'll have to evaluate. But if this continues to grow and there appears to be, mainstream media picking up on it, it certainly will not serve their interests, and it could derail the legislation. But again, we're getting very ahead of ourselves here. We have to wait to see how this develops and what it looks like by the time the committee meetings are happening and then ultimately any voting. This gentleman writes, UFC's proximity to the Trump admin is going to make this stink so much worse if there isn't significant action taken to address it. Existential threat. Yeah. I mean, or nothing happens and everyone moves on because people are just happy to get fights, and UFC makes a few changes and it seems to stop things for the most part. That could happen too. Listen, here's another part. UFC doesn't like the press that they're getting around this. They institute internally much tougher policies. They pull fights when there's irregular betting, such that there is. And this thing kind of just gets controlled, and that's more or less the end of it, I guess. There's something like that. Now, that could be one way it goes, but let's ask if it has infiltrated the degrees of, or I should say the officiating side of the sport, judges, referees, you name it, the UFC can't control that. I mean, that they could be as hard line about it with their own staff, with their own fighters, with their own broadcast, the whole 9 yards. They could run the tightest ship imaginable. They can't stop that. Or maybe there'd be a way that they could, but it's not obvious to me what exactly that would be. So this is a thing that here's another question. To the extent here, can the UFC control this? Right? In other words, is this something that if you made a tweak here, you instituted a policy there, the UFC has enough control over the scope of the matter such that it basically goes away, or is again once a very rare thing that we don't have to worry about the integrity of the competitions. Again, this is this. You see what I mean? Like, these questions have to get answered. This tells us what the situation is, how bad it is, how not bad it is, how solvable it is, how widespread it is, and everything in between. Right? That's kind of the issue here. Not to get too political, but when you see our current regime treating our government like a casino, people can deduce, I think you mean, that fraud is just legal now. Again, we don't want to make claims about what has happened without big claims require big evidence, right? It's sort of the inverse Hitchens razor. If you're going to make a claim, you got to be able to justify it with evidence. So I understand what the point you're making. But this is what I mean also. Like, people are going to get bitter at me for saying this, but it's true. I said the UFC is a right-wing sport. Being a right-wing sport doesn't just mean that your organization and the broader sport around it is being used as a vehicle for political purposes, although it does mean that too. But one of the ways it's able to do that is because of the associations and the relationships, the direct causal relationships that the organization has to the Republican administration, and how there's continuity between the two, both for electoral purposes, but also now for policy gains on the Aliak side. And then now as this, again, I'm not saying that Kash Patel is going to run cover for them, but I know that he's been an avid supporter of them, filmed at their events multiple times, lives in Las Vegas, is a Las Vegas resident. To what extent is he best situated to look after this when the people he'd be looking after have relationships to his own? I mean, okay, the DOJ is supposed to be separate from the White House, but we all know, essentially from his boss, right? From the guy who nominated him. I feel like the UFC has some questions to answer and some information to help the public put their mind at ease, if they can. I don't know if they will. They seem to not like to do that. Well, that's not true. Sometimes they'll do that, but it's hard to say if they'll do it this time. But if you're like me and you're hearing shadowy, unnamed figures in Las Vegas are going to lower income fighters to get them to commit fucking fraud on national TV, and it's happening in non-isolated incidents, that seems bad. That seems bad. Would not be surprised if this person writes, if the mob is involved, easy money. Now, we don't know that. I'm not declaring that. There's only a few that seem plausible, but there are a few that are plausible. It could just be bettors, for example, who they got tons of money and, or whatever. They're degenerates and they just don't care what law they break, and they just want to get in on the action. They feel like this is an easy way to con the public. That absolutely could be the thing. Imagine that. You got a bunch of people who are just doing that because they want to just con everybody. They're con artists. They're illegal lawbreakers, but they're otherwise unrelated to anything else. They are engaging in crime, but they're not related to any kind of larger project. Yeah, that could absolutely be the case too. We just don't know. We don't know. We don't know what the answer is. But there's enough impropriety suggested and articulated here that getting an answer to that question seems pretty critical. Like, we need to definitively know. Let's ask, who are the shadowy figures who are going to fighters to do this? Who are they? And why don't we know more about them? Feels like we should know that. Now, let me show you this before we get going. It's important. Let's see. Look here. So this is this dude, Harry Mack, who's having quite the show. All right. So he wrote this, and I retweeted it. For those demanding red meat, I've reached out to a certain MMA manager as a professional courtesy to give him a chance to explain himself. Should he not explain himself, I'll share what I have without his explanation. So going back, this is the update. Oops, excuse me. Here we go. This is it. Credit to Jason House, that's the guy who runs Iridium, for taking my call. He maintains he and Iridium had no knowledge of any abnormalities with Dulgarian. House says he's committed to working with authorities and has assured me he will cut ties with Isaac, that's obviously Dulgarian, if it's deemed he engaged in misconduct. House also directly addressed the idea that he has matchmaking sway, preferential treatment, and upholds he has no familial ties to any UFC matchmaker. He upholds iridium stable and preparedness are the only reason they receive these opportunities, and he has no say in matching. For whatever it's worth, the guy seemed genuinely distraught and appreciative someone wanted his side. Notably, House states he has not had contact with James Krause since the Minner incident, or scandal, and cooperated with authorities in that case. To be clear, there's still let me pull this up. This is his opinion. To be clear, there's still a very big issue here. The UFC knew of a fight with extremely abnormal betting activity. He writes 16 million handle on the Apex prelim. I don't know what that means. I don't know what a handle is. And the UFC and Dulgarian's team proceeded anyway. Heads are still going to roll, but it's unclear who at this point. Yeah, like I said, I had to go live because that might be the canary in the coal mine, right? Of something much bigger. Maybe it's not. Maybe this fizzles out after a few days and new fights happen on Saturday. They all seem above board one way or the other, and everyone just moves on. That is a real plausible thing. You should not lose sight of it. Hello, there's an election tomorrow. People the news cycle moves fast. Stuff gets just washed out, even things that you think are going to last. Without investigative reporters doing the work, without mainstream media really picking up on it, the story has a pretty good potential of dying. I don't know if it will get picked up. Maybe it does. We'll just have to monitor it, and I will. But Ariel Helwani, to me, the absolute gold standard. If he reports it, it is fucking true. Shadowy figures are approaching fighters who are on the lower economic end of the total pie, and whoever these figures are trying to cut them in on illegal gambling proceeds for fixing fights, essentially, or some other way of manipulating them. That seems bad. And if this gentleman is right that their FBI has flagged hundreds, or at least not hundreds, but at least 100, or right around that 100 or so UFC fights, that is also bad. By the way, what would be the other fight on the Garcia Onama card, according to Harry Mack, who again has proven to be quite prescient? What would be the other fight on that card that the two fighters would be investigated? How is the problem? How big is the problem, and how is it so big that we have? Well, how big is it? Is it always on the Apex cards? Does it happen on pay-per-views? Does it not because there's less scrutiny? I'm guessing probably not. Also, you get a different kind of crop that fights for the pay-per-views typically, but I don't know, man. There's not many times I've seen UFC news in my life and I was like, am I reading this right? Like, am I absorbing the weight of this accurately? I suppose I was. Let's finish this up and we'll call it a day here. I got to go be with my family. Create says, remember when fighter would shout out betting cappers post-fight win? Yeah. That was the thing that used to happen. Real quickly, y'all, this one is definitely above board what I'm about to show you. I got to make sure everyone knows. You guys see my friends here. All live programming, which this would include, all live programming on this channel is brought to you by our friends at Toiletries. LT20, 20% off site-wide. There's a link in the description box below. Please share my email far and wide, LukeThomasNews@gmail.com. Send this video to whoever needs to see it, who has any useful information to help me understand what is happening here. LukeThomasNews@gmail.com. LukeThomasnews@gmail.com. And if you want to save some money on some quality stuff, people that take good care of me on this channel, they'll take very good care of you, and I'll save you some money. LT20 for 20% off site-wide at Toiletries, TOOLETRIES.com. Are we done on this one? Yes, we are. Okay, boys and girls, thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned. This is going to be a long week. Head on a swivel, boys and girls. Head on a swivel.